I had been 3 days in that quiet sector, the kind of quiet that gathers in the corners of a ship and softens everything it touches. The stars out there were old and patient, and my coffee had gone cold in its cup more times than I could count. I remember leaning back in the worn seat, letting the hum of the reactor settle into my bones like a lullaby I had known since I was a younger man. It was on the edge of one of those long, unhurried watches that I heard it. A pulse, faint as a whisper through the old emergency band, the sort of frequency no one had bothered to listen to in years, slow, even, and somehow familiar. I held my breath without meaning to, and the pulse seemed to wait for me. I let the breath out, and it came again, soft and sure, matching the cadence of my own quiet lungs. I should have logged it and moved on. A wiser captain would have. But I had grown fond of small mysteries, and this one felt almost kind, so I marked the bearing in my notes, eased the helm a degree or two toward the sound, and let the ship drift gently inward, following that gentle, breathing signal into the dark. The Gambit had been drifting that way for perhaps an hour, with the signal breathing alongside us like a companion in the dark. When the proximity chime gave its small, polite warning, I looked up without hurry, and there it was, a comet of pale ice cutting a long, slow arc across our path, ancient and unbothered by our presence. I eased the helm over, more out of courtesy than alarm, and the ship slipped into the edge of its tail. It was the most beautiful scrape I ever took. The shock wave rolled through us like a swell under a small boat, and the hull whispered as a million bright grains of ice combed against the plating. I could hear the old metal singing, soft and complaining, the way an old house settles in the night. Somewhere a panel chimed about lost paint, and I smiled at it and let it chime. When the glitter thinned, I saw the lifeboat. It hung there in the drift, a small dark shape, with no markings on its flank and no warmth in its hull, no lights, no breath of power, and it was bound, as patiently as we were, along the very same bearing as my quiet, listening signal. I brought the Gambit alongside her with the patience of a man parking a rowboat at a familiar dock. She was a small, cold thing, that lifeboat, and she took our clamp without complaint, as though she had been waiting on us for a very long time. The seal kissed shut, the pressures evened, and I drifted through into a cabin that smelled faintly of old paper and colder air. There was not much inside, a bench, a stowed blanket folded in the way I fold blankets, and on the little chart shelf, a logbook. I opened it with the idle curiosity of a man flipping through a borrowed novel and found my own hand looking back at me. My loops, my tired slant, my habit of underlining dates twice. It described a voyage I had never made in calm and certain detail, as if I had already lived it and simply mislaid the memory. I did not argue with it. I slipped the book into my coat, undocked with rather more haste than dignity, and let the Gambit fall back into open dark. Only then did I glance through the forward port and notice mildly that the stars outside were arranged just slightly wrong. I tucked the wrongness of those stars away for later, the way one tucks a strange coin into a pocket, and set a course for the fuel cache at Balor's Drift. It was a quiet little hollow in the dark, a string of old tanks tethered to a rock no bigger than a barn, and I had taken on drink there a dozen times before without so much as a hello. They were waiting for me this time. A patched gunship, her welds shining where new metal met old, drifted out from behind the tanks as gently as a cat from under a chair. Their captain came on the channel with a voice like dry rope and told me, almost kindly, that the signal was theirs, and the cargo, whatever I imagined it to be, was owed. I talked first, the way I always do. I offered tea, metaphorically speaking, and listened to them refuse it. Then I put 2 soft shots across their bow. more apology than threat, and slipped the gambit sideways into the cover of the rock. They clipped my fuel line on the way out. I limped off into the long dark with a slow weep in my belly and a name burning quietly on my comms. The Quiet Star. So I drifted, with the engines hushed down to a whisper and the lights low to spare what little I had. In the dark grew a quality I had not met before. It was thicker somehow, the way deep water is thicker than shallow. I noticed the chronometer first, because I am fond of clocks, and mine had taken to running gently backward, not in panic, not in protest, simply unwinding itself, minute by patient minute, as if the day were folding up to be put away. Then I caught my own face in the canopy glass, and found that it was a beat behind me. I lifted my cup, and the man in the glass lifted his a moment later, with the small puzzled smile of a guest arriving slightly late to his own party. I waved at him, just once, and he waved back when he was ready. The signal was louder out there. It had grown confident, and somewhere between one slow breath and the next, I realized it had borrowed my voice. It spoke softly, in my own cadence, of harbors I had not yet seen, and called me by a name only I had ever used for myself. And I listened, calm as a lamp, and let it talk. And so, by and by, I came upon the source of it. A single dim star, no bigger in my window than a coin held at arm's length, and giving off no heat that my instruments could measure. A cold little ember, patient as a stone at the bottom of a well. Around it, in a wide and tidy ring, floated ships, dozens of them. A freighter from a century before my grandmother, her hull plates softened by time. A scout cutter of a shape I had only seen in old books. A pilgrim barge, a courier, a yacht with gilded fittings gone dull. All of them quiet, all of them whole, and all of them turned with their noses pointed inward, like a congregation that had found its altar and had no further need to speak. I took my place gently among them, as if I had been expected, and let the gambit drift to rest. And there, with the signal at last clear and unhurried, the coordinates resolved themselves, and I read them twice to be sure. They were not out in the dark at all. They were aboard my own ship. A small sealed compartment, low in her belly, that in all my years I had never once opened. I went down into her belly with a hand torch and a quiet mind, past the humming of the lines and the small private weather of the engine room, until I came to a panel I had walked by 10,000 times without seeing. The seal gave under my cutter with a sigh, like a sleeper turning over, and inside, behind a soft wash of blue, I found a man in a stasis cradle, folded into himself the way a letter folds into its envelope. He had my hands. He had the small crooked scar along my jaw. He was older than me, by some long, unkind stretch of years, and his mouth was moving slowly around words the glass would not let me hear. I did not need to hear them. I knew the shape of my own warnings. I stood with him a while. I did not wake him. I closed the panel as gently as one closes a child's door, and I went back up through the ship, feeling oddly rested, and I lit the engines and burned out toward open dark. I told the log, in a steady voice, that I would come back for him when I understood what I'd just chosen not to know.